It's my pleasure at this point to welcome our special panelists for this afternoon. I'll start with György Szabó, the former director of the Trafo House of Contemporary Art. Eszter Babarczy, a noted writer on new media and also a cultural historian, essayist, translator, noted author, and a veteran of the Romanian Film Festival here, Mona Nicoară, the director of last year's film Our School, and also of the wonderful Kickstarter campaign video that helped raise the money to put on this festival this year. So
my proudest achievement.
Exactly. Well, nothing to sniff at. So I said at the beginning of the screening that this was actually one of 4 Hungarian films that were shown in the 1982 New York Film Festival. I'll mention the others now. One was Károly Mak's film Another Way. One was Boccaccio in Hungary by the great Miklós Janszko, and also a film Lost Illusions by Gyula Gazdag. And, you know, it's unusual to have 4 films from any country in the New York Film Festival, even from America. So, by contrast, this year in the New York Film Festival, we had 1 Hungarian film, which is the film Final Cut, Ladies and Gentlemen, by the young director György Szabó. And for people who don't know about this film or didn't see this film, it's a film made up of more than 400 excerpts from other movies throughout film history. It tries to sort of tell a love story of a man and a woman using excerpts from other films. And one of the things that György Szabó has said about why he was inspired to make this film was because now it's impossible to make a film in Hungary. So he had to make a film from bits and pieces of other films. And the title is even a bit provocative, Final Cut, because Andy Vajna, who is now the government film commissioner in Hungary and who is in charge of administering government funds for filmmaking, and who may be better known to American audiences as the producer of the Terminator films and a lot of other big Hollywood movies of the 80s and 90s under his now defunct Carolco film studio, has said that he demands to have final cut over all films that are now made in Hungary. But this is, just to give a little background, part of an overall sort of reorganization of how culture is being handled by the government of the current Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, and it parallels what we've been talking about at the last few days with the situation in Romania, basically the centralizing of cultural control, formerly independent, now under the thumb of government ministers. And some of the things that the government of Viktor Orbán has been accused of is replacing key figures in cultural institutions, staging pro-government exhibitions, and even replacing historic statues, which is a fascinating a piece of information. So I guess I'll start, actually, György, with asking you if you can just maybe give us a little bit more background on what has been going on in Hungary in the past year, and actually how this affected you personally in your own work as an arts curator.
Because my background is economist, so I won't be so passionate. I tried to give a kind of sober picture of what was going. So after '89, Budapest was all the time in the hand of the liberals or those people who are very close to the culture, which was very important in Budapest, and it meant there was a certain continuity. In the countryside, there was all the time a change. So sometimes liberal, sometimes very conservative. So it keeps changing. And in the last 20 years, so there was a very, very important stability for the cultural life. And in the last 10 years, when Orbán Viktor lost election in 2002, since then, too many years has passed, but many let's say, conservative, or I would say that in the cultural field, less talented people moved to the countryside. And they were looking for a kind of oppositional status. And they all gathered behind the recent government now. And so they would like to take over Budapest, which is a very typical now, but not only Budapest, but especially Budapest was the liberal city, the capital, was the big enemy of Viktor Orban. So what, and even he had to face with that fact that he was supporting culture very much until 2002, but in the election, it did not affect at all. So it's altogether most important things is the cultural sector is not important for him at all, for the government. Much more for those, I would say that less talented clients who are around the government, and mostly they were in the countryside, they were looking for a chance to make their life somehow. But on the contrary of the recent changes, so they would like to get power. And so these clients slowly get over the key positions in Budapest and all over the country. And those who are, let's say, professionals who have really strong background, they are all branded as a liberal or a communist person or whatever. So that's my observation. I don't know, how do you see this?
Wow, you surprised me. Maybe just I'll try to reinterpret what György said, that like Budapest versus country, that's a cultural divide, what we call a Kulturkampf between the urbanite culture and the narodniks, if you know, the folkish. The folkish is like a bit too much, but only a little bit too much. Mm-hmm. And it's bound up with some anti-Semitic tradition in Hungary. So Budapest is not the country. And ever since the 1990s, this division between urbanite, cosmopolitan, open, progressive, modernist culture and nationalistic culture based basically on resentment, on being a victim among other things of urbanites. Now this culture has coalesced around Orban when he very cynically actually shifted from the liberal center to the right in the early 90s. He just discovered that there was a void, a political void. And now, of course, it happened in 94, and since we always speculate if he came to actually believe in it, but just let me quote one of his recent sayings. I'm not sure you will get it, but if you don't, please tell me. He said that all good Hungarians were born out of the two-rule bird. Now, the two-rule bird, it's a kind of eagle-like, something like a totem pole. For pagan, supposedly pagan traditions, but it was very important in the interwar era, especially on the extreme right. So to say that, you know, we are all born in the sign of the two-rule, or physically, I mean, being related by blood to this totem bird, is a very strong message. And actually, two-rule statues are going up all over the country. I mean, like every district in Budapest has a statue. Now and the other thing is that what György mentioned, that clientelism, political patronage, is a tradition in Hungary. It has been a very important factor in Hungarian economic and cultural and social life for centuries. And it has not changed, not a bit. What happened, though, was that under like the more liberal leftist governments, leading politicians would basically leave the cultural sphere alone. They did favor certain people. They did make political appointments, but there was like more diversity. Now, Orban, on the other hand, at least from our point of view, who are like being marginalized and politically, you know, in a very, very fragile position, there is a Gleichschaltung. The country is gleichgeschaltet, like under the National Socialists, which is not to say that he is a Nazi. That would be going too far. It's gleichgeschaltet, like coordinated. I think the coordinated, that's the English word for it, in the sense that he keeps dissent to the minimum. His party is an extremely disciplined party. And he doesn't care about culture that much, but he does think that the state has to extend its influence to all the symbolic sphere. That's why statues are removed. I mean, streets are renamed, and it's a big issue all the time. So it's like kind of like colonizing the cultural sphere, the symbolic sphere, the universities, the curricula for schools, everything. And I think that's what György refers to as, I am not sure that it really is the case that there are the good guys like him and myself, you know, and then there are the bad guys who don't actually know anything about culture. I would rather emphasize that there is a need to conform. I mean, either you conform to this system, which gets like extremely nationalist and I don't know, it's without spirit. It's like completely empty. It's an empty shell from the interwar era. It's nothing. There is no content to it. So you have to conform. And if you do not conform, then you are in a very real sense in an existential threat. You will be fired. You are not going to get any money for your films. Films can be made. A lot of money is there for films that are favored. Some great kings or whatever. So that's, was that like a valid, do you think?
Yeah, there was a selection, a long-term selection in Budapest, so that's why I guess many artists who are really very good, they got on the top, and they kept this position for a long time. And that was their scene, because they were there for 20 years, so that's their scene because they were collaborator of the social liberal parties, you know. And they now, these people, most of the people have been changed already, and they look for loyal clients. That's very typical, but which is the most harmful thing in this whole process. So when hopefully will come sooner or later another government, and how can we repair? How can we mend the broken hearts? Because there are too much passions now. If you switch on the radio and so on and so on, the media is also very divided. So that's the question: how can we build the future for the young generation, like this was in this film?
Well, it begs the question because I know on the film side, Bela Tarr, for example, has been very outspoken in the press about what's going on and the need to decentralize control over film production. But what, if any, outcry has there been in other segments of the arts, in the world of literature or museums or theater and that sort of thing, and how effective, if at all, has it been in sort of raising awareness about this situation in Hungary?
You know, the problem is that the opposition is not strong because the people, they don't have savings. That's a key question, the key factor. So those people are very loud, or many of those, who are really, has a, let's say, very low living standards and well educated, and they're so they can find somehow their living. Mm-hmm. But there are many who want to leave to mm-hmm. abroad. For example, Arpad Chilling, who is a theater director, so he's very, very loud. He criticizes very much because he got his, let's say, financial stability mm-hmm. Beyond the border. Or Cornél Mudrucó, who's actually a film director and theater director as well. He can get money from Hungarian funds so much for the theater pieces, though he got money 280 million for his next film, but the money was never released still. Mm. So it's what I can see. There are some really important names for the recent cultural policy, and they are trying to play with them. But the recent culture policy doesn't want to operate the cultural sector. That's the most important. What I can see, it's much more a certain manipulation, playing with the cards, pretending that we are, let's say, do not confine the freedom of arts. But what I can see, no money at all, mostly for those artists who wants to keep their sovereignty, self-expression, who are, let's say, very critical, would dare to criticize the recent process in the society. But it happens not because of there's a Fidesz on power. It was before, so it's a tradition in Hungary, criticize very much the political era, the economic process, what we have, because it's all the time very bad in the last 10 or 12 years. So it is much more is a question, how can we step out from this framework now, which is created by the political era? That's the big issue for the cultural sector now.
There had been protests, but I do agree with György that they are mostly inefficient in the cultural sphere. One reason being that people in culture are divided, and as I said before, there is a very strong tradition of clientelism. Mm. So even if even a very good artist can be or must be a client unless he can get some funding abroad. So as long as you are stuck in Hungary, in the Hungarian compromise, what we've just seen in this film, that those young people are like, being turned into another generation of compromised, petty, meaningless lives. So it's very, in a way, it's very provincial and petty, the fights between those intellectual groups or cultural groups, which means that people don't pay attention anymore. But I also, it's going a bit beyond the film and the cultural sphere in general, but I feel I have to mention that there had been protests, street protests, for freedom of speech and freedom of media, and those drew like tens of thousands of people.
But most of those protests are centered in Budapest. And all you need to do is to sort of step outside of Budapest and you realize that Budapest is in a way a bubble of resistance, just like it used to be a bubble of cultural effervescence. And you don't even need to step outside of Budapest. You need to turn on the TV or look at the media, which is mostly government controlled. And if it's not government controlled, at least now it actually needs to comply with Hungarian media regulations. So you're in this situation where they effectively control most of the media with one or two token exceptions that are used to demonstrate sort of in a Putin-like fashion that there is freedom of media and there is freedom of expression, when actually those are there precisely in order to legitimize the rule. The exceptions are there to legitimize the rule.
And Mona, we were talking yesterday about the fact that one Hungarian film, recent Hungarian film, Just the Wind, by the director Benedikt Flighoff, won a major prize at the Berlin Film Festival this year, the Silver Bear, but has been very much marginalized in Hungary. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and what that film is about and why it might not be a film that the current regime wants to be seen.
Well, the film is dealing with these serial murders of Roma that were perpetrated by extremists in the Hungarian countryside. Primarily, some of those people were probably caught and are actually standing trial as we speak. But it sort of exposes both casual racism and this kind of violent systemic racism that is, I think, very prevalent in Hungary, not just against the Roma, but as we saw last week in the parliament, against the Jews as well. And the film was very, my understanding that the film was actually delicately and not so delicately sabotaged by the Hungarian government. In Berlin, the Hungarian government distributed at the press conference for Just the Wind, which is an extraordinary film. It's a fantastic film. They distributed this little press release, this little handout that basically undermines it and says, well, that's actually not how things are happening. This is not a representation of reality. And by the way, we gave money to this film, therefore it should not actually speak against the government. And I happened to be in Budapest when it opened in theaters. And the coverage for a film that had just received an award 2 months before, a major award in Berlin, the press coverage was abysmal, absolutely abysmal. It only played in a few art house cinemas. The one that I saw it in had like 4 people in who were there because they wanted to see another film and did not know that this film was playing. The vast majority of people in Hungary have no idea about this. Just the Wind.
Just the Wind.
Yeah.
Just the Wind. I think it's going to be released here probably next year. Yeah.
It's being released in France this year. Yeah. Flighoff told me that he got a very good distributor in France. So there is this ironic situation that wherever I go in cultural centers, I mean, even in Bratislava, I was 2 weeks ago and there was a screening of Just the Wind. And in Hungary, it doesn't exist. It's just not, it doesn't fit that kind of framework where all those wars are fought and where this Gleichschaltung is, you know, happening. It doesn't fit stereotypes. I mean, it's real. It's real. It's not the game of political loyalists fighting for spoils and appointments. It's real. It does not romanticizes gypsies. It's an extremely cruel film. It does not criticize the government. It's just a very accurate, but also very sympathetic description of a tragedy that is going on. It's and you know, it's a good film, and we have a good film that doesn't fit into Hungarian culture as it is now. It doesn't fit into state-controlled media. It doesn't fit into what Andy Vajna thinks, or Vajna, whatever, thinks about blockbusters. It doesn't fit anywhere. So Fligov, he's one of those filmmakers who, he's like younger than us, late 30s, mid 30s, who works mostly abroad. Just a star works mostly abroad. I mean, in international co-productions. He couldn't get anywhere with his idea of setting up an independent film council. He didn't get anywhere with it.
It's interesting that in one interview, when Andy Vajna was defending Hungarian film production, he used as an example the fact that the most recent Die Hard film with Bruce Willis was filmed in Hungary, as an example of the fact that there is film production going on there. So that evidently is what counts now as a Hungarian film. But I'll ask all of you, because of the fact that this panel came about because of these kind of curious parallels between what's been happening in Hungary and what's been happening in Romania, if you see this as being merely a coincidence, or if there is something in the air in Europe that is causing us to see these instances, and now perhaps more instances of this kind of shift in government attitude towards art and culture.
I have to tell you, I was in Zagreb on an ITM meeting, and 400 managers like me came together to speak about certain issues, and I was really astonished when my colleagues from Croatia and Slovenia, they said we are the example for their politicians. So the same method it's spreading in our region, definitely.
There's something about partly, you know, economic situation, that the economic situation is getting a little worse. And there's always these reactionary tendencies when the economic situation is getting a little worse. But I think there's nothing, you know, it's not coincidental that this is kind of happening a generation or 20 years after the fall of the wall. These are forces that were always there. And there's an understanding, there's a long history, even before communism in our countries, of culture serving the state or serving political purposes. And there was, you know, 1989 sort of destabilized that idea for a while. But 20 years is kind of enough time to regroup, consolidate, to get severely nostalgic for those days when things were good and everybody was singing in the same choir, as a former Minister of Culture was saying in Romania. So my suspicion is that it's just that enough time has passed after 1989 that these forces and this culture, this understanding of culture as serving the state found its footing again.
I would add that.
Just to corroborate that there is a general and very deep disillusionment with democracy in general, and it has to do with the economic situation, but also with, you know, the democracy is not such a great thing, except that everything else is worse. I mean, you know, bickering politicians, they are corrupt, they are complacent, they don't care, they run their clienteles and so on. But so there is this general dissatisfaction and a kind of a mental withdrawal into like basic life support systems, you know, just to get on with the next day, to get the heating, pay the bills, get the children to school, and people don't pay attention to culture. They don't pay attention to culture because culture has been very political, serving the state and opposing the state. And they just don't want to do anything with politics. In Hungary, about 60% of the population, adult population who have to vote, cannot choose a party who to vote for, and they don't know if they would turn up at an election. I mean, 60%. And I think it coupled with the economic situation, it means that the less the intelligentsia and the cultural sphere is producing meaning and kind of like trouble, you know, the better the parties are off. The young people only look for ways to protest. If they participate in politics, they tend to turn to some extreme. In Hungary, it's mostly the extreme right, but I was told just today that they are more on the left in Romania, like anti-capitalist, anti-globalization, neo-Marxist.
Yeah, I would not overstate their
all
numbers.
right. Okay, all right. But it's very the support for Jobbik, the extreme rightist party that made this statement that we should take draw up a list of Hungarian politicians and members of parliament of Jewish origins because they pose a national security threat. That was a proposal he made in parliament just a few days ago. So that's the party that many young people would vote for, not because they are anti-Semites, it's because that's a form of protest. They don't know anything about, Hungarian history anymore. All they know is that they are deeply dissatisfied, disillusioned. They feel our generation deprived them of opportunities, and it's very. On the other hand, they don't see that they could create. I mean, somehow the gravitational force in Hungary is just 100 times worse than in many countries, and I guess it's the same for other countries in the region, that it's very difficult to start a career, a team, an enterprise, or theater group, or anything. It's extremely difficult, so they don't see a way out. They either leave, those who are more open-minded, they leave the country. Hundreds of thousands of people left the country in the last couple of years, and it's the same for Romania, right? And those who remain, they are happy with an ideology that is all about putting the blame on someone else. It's the IMF, the multinational companies, the Hungarian minorities, the Jews, the gypsies, anyone, it's not us. We suffer and it's not us. And I think it has to do with these false expectations around concerning capitalism and democracy and how soon we will catch up with the rest of the world in terms of living standards. So
I would like to add some surrealistic stuff. For example, now this nation is really in big suffer, but at the same time we have lots of tourists now and they enjoy very much Budapest. So it's like a catastrophe tourism. So once I really was shocked because I was standing near Gödör, which is in the central, and there was a group of American tourists, and I was just listening to because the guide was very passionate. Actually, there were two guides, and they were speaking about 56 all about war and so on, what was going, you know, and it was very bad feeling for me. You know, they come just to see what's going right now in Budapest. But which is interesting, and we can see as a reflection in this film, why the opposition, as I already mentioned, it's not so strong. Because the people, they don't have savings, so economically the intellectuals are very weak. Because the intellectual people, they are, let's say, the outpost of the opposition all the time. In the countryside, the intellectual area is very thin, very, very thin. Many of them already moved up to Budapest because there is no job opportunity, or left the country. Because the private sector is not strong and the state too strong, so the influence, the control is very strong. So it's very hard if you don't have money, but to oppose. When the film was dated in 63, yeah? It's very interesting because that's the time when the young generation comes up and they start to consume Coca-Cola, pop music, and so on and so on. Now what you can see, but I felt lots of things mostly from the 80s, you know, which is interesting, you probably did not recognize the first teacher was Polish, originally Polish, and the film was done in 81. So that's a very interesting context. So, but anyway, at that time, the culture was very important because the consumption was not high like now. So if the cultural sector is drowned, then the people shift their consumption to the market. But at that time, it was not possible. So that's why the opposition was a little bit stronger, but still a very thin layer of the society. And now the situation is much difficult because, okay, we cannot do this, or we can go abroad to look around. We can be an undertaker. We can do whatever we want, in a way, if we have money. That's very important, if you have money. If you don't have money, you must stay, or you have to find another solution for yourself. But you are very much in the hand of the state because the taxation is very high. And the funding is so important in culture.
May I add something?
Sure.
Concerning the film? That interestingly, I did see the film when it came out, and I was like a teenager. I'm even younger than those in the film, somewhat younger, and now that I see it, in an age, I mean, when I'm basically the same age as the director was and the writer when they made it, and I see this deep bitterness of these adult people who had to realize that when they were those kids in around 60, and there was this promise that they will not fit into the system, and they end up fitting into the system by 67. And there is a very interesting parallel because we belong. I mean, I am the same age as, almost the same age as Fidesz people. I was a member of Fidesz in '88, and we have the same feeling that there was a promise of a generation, like in '56, that would, liberate the country, that would bring in some fresh air, and we failed. We failed, and our children are leaving. Like my son is going to go to England, or I know. I mean, and I think that's very important. That it's another generation that has failed, and this is the fourth generation now that is failing Hungary or fleeing Hungary. You either fail or you flee. That's the message, and it's the same thing, nasza жизнь, or life. It's still the same. It's still nasza жизнь. Even though people don't have to learn Russian anymore at school. I mean, that's not obligatory. That's not mandatory.
Because we only have a few minutes left, I want to see if there's any questions from the audience for our very distinguished panel. I think we have one all the way in the back. Yes? A question about what is a prognosis of our panelists of whether or not there's hope for change, especially among young people. The woman asking the question says she felt a mix of anticipation, but also very much hopelessness when she was living in Budapest in the lead up to Orbán's election.
I have a theory. There's a chain which goes through our life in Hungary, which means we are all the time deprived from sovereignty, to think yourself, to be alone yourself and to find the solutions. It already starts in the school because we have the Prussian education system, which means you have to just learn, the datas, but not to think, not to have an overview, not to see the structures, to give the answers why. And when you are an entrepreneur, our tax system is so difficult. Though I was studying economics, if you are an individual, you need absolutely for taxation to speak a bookkeeper, because you want to understand what's in the tax rules, I mean.
I tell Americans about that. I mean, Americans know all about that, so don't complain.
No, I guess it's much simpler. I talk to people, the taxing, so yeah. And then, for example, I belong to an institution for 20 years, or different institutions. And it was very interesting because we were called, let's say, the first institution and later on non-profit or for-profit organizations. We had a contract with the municipality for 5 years or 4 years. But the subsidy was the subject of discussion year by year. And that's why the leaders of the institutions, they all the time want to make a special treatment with the party people to make let's say, a very strange business consent with the politicians. But if we go through all details of our life, this is very typical. The changing conditions, we have to adapt ourselves all the time, but we are linked very much to the state, to somebody, and we don't have chance so much to learn our independence. If you are an entrepreneur, very often I can speak to the people that they feel they all depend on what the state would do, because the tax system changes so rapidly. So very, very difficult to make any scheme, any plan for the future for them.
Well, yeah, just to elaborate on that, it's, I teach at the university, arts students, actually applied arts mostly, but they have mixed intentions and desires, ambitions. And what I see is that Europe is a blessing and a very bad thing for Hungary. A blessing in the a blessing for the individual because there is greater mobility and they leave. They leave. That's I was one of the organizers of those demonstrations, especially the early demonstrations against the media law. And we had 20 and then 30, then 40,000 people out there in the streets, but very few people in their 20s, very few. They already plan to leave, so they do not have a stake in the country. Or they go for the extreme right. And so this is a blessing, but in some sense it was better. In a totalitarian culture, you are forced to confront your political and social reality. Presently, you can just flee. You can choose the exit option. And what my optimistic prognosis would be, though, is that they will come back. That there's such a great mobility that they go within the union, or many young people go to South America, everywhere, all over. I mean, London is the 4th biggest Hungarian city. I mean, according to inhabitants of Hungarian origin and native Hungarian speakers. But they can come back. And I do hope that when people with a Western experience, with an experience of an open and more liberal democracy, where it's more meritocratic, they will come back with experience, with some good economic or better economic background, with some independence in whether in material terms, or just that's the option that they can always go back and forth between countries, and they can transform Hungary, by that they are not forced to fit into the system as all these 4 generations were forced to fit into this system that we are reproducing for all children, and we are so ashamed of. So that's the optimistic scenario.
To build on that optimism, between 2006 and 2010, I witnessed basically every national holiday turning into May Day, like a holiday for the apprentices when everybody riots. And it used to be that it was mostly the extreme right. Between 2006 and 2010, you'd always see that, the guys dressed all in black with the boots and the nationalist flags and all that. But what I find very interesting is that since then, the numbers of demonstrations of the opposition on national holidays has increased. And there's these vast demonstrations that show at least some mobilization. And there's a lot more of that than there is of the other stuff, at least now. And I have no idea whether that's actually an indication of where things will go or of how desperate things have gotten. But I choose to see optimism in that, some signs of optimism.
It's because I'm one of the organizers, and I just don't want to create illusions. So it's very nice when on October the 23rd, the national holiday, in remembrance of the 56th revolution, there are like 50,000 people out there, and against the government basically. But those people are more like middle-aged, over 30. Young people don't come, or few young people. If you look at the crowds, and even among the organizers, there are some young people, but not that many, because they choose the exit option. And I completely agree with them. I mean, so, but yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's fun to demonstrate, actually. It's the good old days of 89 and 88. it's good to give them some of that experience. It's exhilarating to be in such a big crowd.
Unfortunately, we have to stop there, but I want to thank all of our panelists for being here and giving us such thoughtful comments this afternoon. Thanks very much.